Recently, I've noticed a number of articles on airline etiquette. That is to say, what people are expected, what society expects people to behave, how society expects people to behave on airlines in terms of respect to each other. And I thought it would be an interesting one to cover. As an example, the Daily Mail had a piece on someone's laptop had actually been cracked because the reclining seat in front of them was pushed so far back that actually damaged the person's laptop. I'm thinking it must have been really excessive to actually do that. Um, but I thought it would be a good subject to discuss because I've had a little bit of experience on long haul flights. Now, I'd say overall I've been lucky in terms of the flights themselves. I've never had a significant problem on the flight itself. Um, Many years ago, I remember there was a guy in front of me who was a bit hypersensitive, like the tiniest little movement or something, he would be funny about it. But other than that, I've never had any sort of prominent examples. Um, but I've had experience of long haul flights. Most recently this year, I went to the Philippines and back, which included a journey from Newcastle to Dubai, 7 hours, Dubai to Singapore, another 7 hours, and Singapore to Manila, 3 hours, alongside several more hours in airport terminals. So a very long journey altogether, the longest I've ever done. I've also been on an 11-hour flight from Newcastle to Amsterdam to Shanghai and uh, Newcastle, Amsterdam, Guangzhou, Guilin, is an internal destination within China. So I've had some experience of long haul flights, and then years ago when I was 13, my family went to the United States. So I've had a bit of experience of it. Um, and actually, I just realized I don't remember anything about that flight, the long haul flight to the United States. Strangely enough, I don't remember anything about it back in 1999. Um, but I've been lucky in terms of altercations in flight. But this does happen, and I think that you get different types of behavior that people can deem to be selfish or entitled or disrespectful. And I think this gets into the old argument about rights versus responsibilities, i.e., responsibilities to others. Now, if you pay for a long haul flight, if you pay for any flight, but particularly a long haul flight, it's money. Long haul flight in this country is going to average over £1,000 or thereabouts. Even a shorter flight is going to be over £100. It's money, right? People save that. They expect reasonably to have a stress-free journey. I've had problems in terms of missing cases, and I could say a few things about that. I think airlines are very selfish when it comes to that issue because they will not pay out unless there's significant damage. In fact, when I went to the Philippines, on the way over there, the last leg of the journey, Jetstar Asia, they lost my case. It was left in Singapore. I did get it the next day, but they wouldn't compensate for the hotel that I had to pay out for, which I wouldn't have had to do if the case had arrived. I think airlines need to consider the inconvenience that they cause to people when they lose their baggage. I mean, they were apologetic, but they wouldn't pay out anything, even a relatively short price of a hotel. But the point is, that shouldn't be an onus on the customer. I feel strongly about that, and I told them so. But anyway, that's that. But in terms of in-flight etiquette, um, take for example the reclining seat issue. Now, there is an argument that it's a fault of the plane designs. There shouldn't be any reclining seats. But if you have a long haul flight, naturally a lot of people will want to sleep. So I wouldn't rule it out completely. I flew on Emirates, and Emirates, I have to say, deserves its high reputation. I found it very comfortable, and I actually felt there was quite a lot of leg space. I had no problems with that. But maybe other long haul carriers don't have as much leg space the way planes were initially designed. If you look at photos from the 60s, it's almost like an entire space in front of the passengers. It was, interestingly enough, more comfortable ostensibly back then. Um, but as aviation has increased and more people fly, then that's perhaps been a change in the designs. But so I wouldn't say that people shouldn't have a right to recline, but to me, it's a basic question of okay, you've got this right, you've paid for your ticket, you have a right to relax. But I would take the logic, well, if you're going to put your seat back, at least don't do it excessively. I think so much of this comes down to a mentality, like I say, of what I am entitled to versus respect for others. Now, just because you have a right to do something doesn't mean that you should just disregard the rights of others. Others have also paid for the tickets. Um, it's a bit like the argument with that's the thing about reclining seats, right? So I would say put it back to some extent, but not so far back that you're crushing the person behind you, and then you get into the issue of their eating tray. Now, I know that in one of those flights, the person in front of me had reclined the seat, but Emirates was good. There was still enough space, and it didn't affect the meal that I got on the plane. It was so that was well designed, but apparently not every airline is like that. Now, there's other issues. I think a lot of people would say their idea of a nightmare flight would be either a drunk person who's being very aggressive, and we've seen that problem on short haul flights earlier this year. Um, the CEO of Ryanair was talking about banning alcohol in airports. I spoke about that issue. I think it is disgusting that people get blind drunk and behave like that on a flight in a confined space at 35,000 feet. It's extremely selfish. It causes other people anxiety. It's potentially dangerous. It's just, and like I said before, absolutely nobody needs more than two drinks. You go to an airport primarily for travel, not to get tanked up. If a plane is significantly delayed, then um, have a drink, fine, but mix it with coffee or something. I just don't see why anyone needs excessive drink, and why they're treating an airport like a bar crawl. I have a big problem with that mentality. Um, Another idea I think people would have of a nightmare flight is a child being disruptive or a baby crying the whole way throughout. Now, a baby is a baby. Babies can't help what they do. And I'm not without sympathy for parents who have no other choice but to bring young children on board. But in the end of the day, other people have also paid for the ticket, and having a child is a choice, right? So I think people are actually understanding to an extent. But, if you have a baby crying for 7 hours, you cannot blame other people for at some point being fed up with that. Um, and I think you get parents in that situation who sort of expect everyone to just sympathize with them, and they don't really put themselves in the shoes of other people who maybe don't have children and don't want to listen to that for 7 hours on a journey. In the end of the day, I take the view that having children is a choice. So you have to take the baggage that comes with that, including the responsibility for young children being noisy. Well, actually, babies, really, really can't help themselves, but young children can. And if their parents aren't drawing lines, then I've seen parents, not just in travel situations, but I've seen them in, for example, cafes, running all over the place, and their parents basically do nothing. It's shocking how little responsibility some parents take. Worse than shocking, it's disgustingly selfish, actually, because it then puts the onus on other people to have to deal with them. And nobody wants to tell off someone else's child, and most people wouldn't do that. So it's primarily the responsibility of the parents. If I had a child, say 5 year old, 6 year old, and they were running around like young children do, it's I'm going to say, look, don't get people's way. And if it's a busy place, I say, look, settle down, sit on the seat, play your game or whatever, but don't get in people's way. That's a responsibility of parents. So with babies, they can't help it. But even in that situation, I think the parent should at least try. They can give it a dummy or give it milk or give it something to try and settle it down. I know there was a Japanese airline that actually had adult only flights, and it was designated that way. I think that would be a reasonable compromise whereby you get flights that are designated families only, or rather families inclusive, and then another flight that is adults only. In other words, people have a choice. So if someone pays for a flight that is adults only, they can reasonably expect not to have a crying baby throughout the whole period. But likewise, if the flight is family friendly, then someone who has a young child can know that they will be accommodated as well. I'd say that's about compromise. I think that's very reasonable. That way, everyone is being accommodated, at least as much as possible. And it may be that they don't get exactly the flight they want, but it's still a compromise. Um, but I do think there is an entitled mindset that people think I've paid for my ticket, I could do whatever I like. There is a basic principle of respecting other people. And you could do that without sacrificing your own, without sacrificing everything that you could do. So, for instance, there's nothing wrong with having a rest and reclining the seat, but just don't recline it so far that the person behind you has no space at all. Recline it a little bit. Um, this is compromise. It's balance. Got young children, that's fine. Maybe you've got no choice. Maybe they need to travel, but you can't get a childminder, or you're visiting a family or something. That happens. People have young children, um, and I can imagine it is very stressful and pressurizing to bring young children on a trip. So I do have sympathy for people in that position. I've got less sympathy though when they won't take any responsibility and they think it's cute, or they sort of expect everyone else to just be okay with the children running around or the baby crying the whole journey. Now, I don't think it's reasonable to just expect other people to just put up with it. In the end of the day, they have also paid for their ticket and they have a right to a stress-free journey. Now, if someone's trying to sleep or they're trying to do important business and they really can't concentrate, then I do think it's on the parent, frankly. Having said that, on long haul flights, there is earphones, so that is something that is provided. So I think long haul flights actually, i- in a way, they carry less problems than short haul flights. I think where a lot of these things happen, they seem to be on short haul flights in Europe, or I've noticed a lot of them seem to be internal flights in the United States. I often hear this from American Airlines or Delta, like internally, American flights seems to produce a lot of problems. I don't know if there's some cultural thing in that, but I've been lucky, I have to say myself, notwithstanding lost baggage. I've generally been lucky on the flights, so I'm grateful for that. But in the end of the day, everyone pays for their ticket, right? So everyone has a reasonable right to expect a stress-free journey or as stress-free as possible. I would also say one other thing. Sometimes cabin crew have to put up with abuse, and I think that's appalling. They get abused, sometimes even assaulted, sometimes female flight attendants get sexually harassed. Appalling. However, I also think airlines sometimes have a bad attitude, and airline staff sometimes don't put themselves in the position of the customer. I've also seen that happening. I saw a documentary recently where there was a delay somewhere in, I think it was either Spain or Turkey, can't remember off the top of my head. But it wasn't just a delay, it was a serious delay, 12 hours. And there was young children, there was people who were feeling unwell, just utterly fed up, and they felt they were being treated like cattle, very little information. Understandably, they were deeply frustrated. And when one of the passengers tried to show a screenshot to an official about what happened, the official swiped the guy's phone away, actually pushed it away, and the man understandably lost his temper. Now, I think there are situations when airlines do treat people badly and they have a bad attitude to customer care. I think most airlines are profit motivated more than customer service motivated. Um, and that's cynical, but in the end of the day, people are paying a lot of money. It's not unreasonable to expect a stress-free journey. Delays sometimes happen. I had to stay overnight in Shanghai because of a typhoon. Well, no one can control the weather, but if customers are put out, then the airline should at least accommodate that as best as possible and be understanding, put themselves in the shoes of passengers. With all due respect to pilots and flight attendants, they're doing it all the time. They're not understanding that people have saved up money and they are in a situation where they don't expect to put up with that. So I think really it's about mutual respect. I mean, that to me is a no-brainer, but I find it interesting that so much, and unfortunate that so many people have an entitled mindset with this. Although I shouldn't exaggerate, there is also a consensus. I think a lot of people also agree that it is about mutual respect. Let me know your thoughts and let me know any anecdotes you might have, any experience you might have had about selfish fellow passengers. Or indeed, it could go the other way. You can have passengers who overreact and just are too sensitive. Like, someone makes the tiniest bit of noise and they just overreact to it, things like that. I mean, someone might want to sleep, but that doesn't mean the person beside them doesn't have a right to watch the in-flight entertainment, with their headphones in or have the airline food or whatever it is. Every individual has rights on a flight. So, um, let me know your thoughts.